Canada's new government is changing how we work so we can deliver better results faster to all Canadians. Canada's new government is focused on the things that matter most to Canadians. We have new ministers with new ideas, ready to respond to new threats and to seize new opportunities. Canada's new government will be action-oriented, driven by a smaller but highly experienced team made to meet the moment we are in.
Well, there's no doubt the key word that Prime Minister Mark Carney wants you to hear there is new, as opposition leaders were quick to come out to define how they see Mark Carney.
But it's the same Liberal gang with the same Liberal agenda, the same Liberal results, and the same Liberal promises of the last 10 years.
He's not building a Canada where everyone belongs. He's building a Canada where only some people will get ahead. And that's, frankly, it tracks. That's his track record. He has been someone that has made billionaires really rich at the cost of workers, and he's going to do that again.
All right, back with me now to check the political pulse as Canada has sworn in his 24th Prime Minister. It's our Friday Insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director of the NDP. You know, me and Rosie spent hours with people who look just like you earlier today.
Maybe a little fresher.
Yeah. Greg, smaller, leaner cabinet. But since then, moving fast, right? The carbon tax is gone as of April 1. The rebates will continue for one more check, which will probably fall in the middle of an election campaign. Very Doug Ford kind of move there. And now Bill Blair says he's been asked to look at the F-35 contract. What do you make of the pace and intention that we've seen on day one of Prime Minister Carney?
It's Friday. Sorry
to borrow a phrase, yeah.
But we spent a lot of Fridays with breaking news.
Yep.
When we were here earlier today, and I can't say anything because you and Rosie put in much longer.
It's indoor work, man. You sit down and talk, right?
But I noticed in our conversation, while Prime Minister Carney was standing there with the cabinet behind him, we were quickly moving on to talk about things like the election and the elimination of the carbon tax. And I don't think if I'm advising the Prime Minister, I'm not sure that that's a bad thing, because the whole point of this cabinet was this: you have to get sworn in, you have to have a cabinet. They did not want to have a lot of pomp and ceremony. There were no long walks up the Rideau Hall driveway, and now they're getting down to business. And so it is really tough to start talking, you know, if you're the Conservative leader and you want to keep talking about the carbon tax and it's already gone, Liberals are going to say, fill your boots. Great, we love this, because right now we're sending a signal with our NATO allies about F-35s. The Prime Minister is showing to be a man of his word. He said that he was going to cancel this in terms of the carbon tax, and he has. So in terms of that, the news that is coming out of this is kind of blocking anything that might be said about, you know, the attempts to try to criticize a pretty impressive resume.
But I mean, on that point though, Fred, like the narrative, you know, to use your word, I mean, what we saw from Pierre Poilievre when he responded today was, this is the fourth term of the Trudeau government. Like, he really seized on the issues you were mad about 2 months ago and a month ago. They're still there. Don't be fooled, right?
Right. And that needs to be his message in terms of how he's trying to define Carney and his team, is that it's the same team. As it's been pointed out earlier today, 87% of this cabinet sat in Trudeau's cabinet. So not a big change there in that regard. On the carbon tax thing, again, it's very hard now for Conservatives to communicate on this. It has been pulled. He signed off on it. The problem, of course, like, I think we all believe, in terms of at least Conservatives, there's still going to be some form of carbon tax. There's still going to be something after.
Industrial
we don't
policy,
know what
for
it
sure.
is, but and that will trickle down to us, right? It will hit consumers at some point, but it's so hard to communicate on now once he cuts this out. So it's going to
price at the pump is going to go down by about 17 cents on April 1.
But but they could go back up another ways down the road, right? When you put in the costs into the industrial emitters, it goes up, and they trickle down to us and the consumers. So prices go up. That's
well, unless they change their behavior and then don't have the price, but, you know, yeah. But I mean, look, this is the thing. It's an explaining and losing thing,
exactly.
right?
We can't communicate on this as easily as we were the last couple of years.
Right, and that 87% was in the Trudeau cabinet. Had they kept the number high at 36, they could have reduced that percentage, you know. But they shrank the cabinet and relied on people in the key jobs. Now, they're still picking from the same caucus that was there. But, you know, Mel, you pointed this out earlier, right away, when the new cabinet was announced. There's no devoted diversity minister, official languages, women, disability, multiculturalism, and Jagmeet Singh has really seized on that, saying this means Mark Carney doesn't care about them. Is that going a bit too far, or do you think that's a fair criticism? Like, just not having a cabinet minister with that job, does that signal a lack of concern, or what do you think?
I think the way that he talked about how that's not going to be his priority, I think I nodded my head when I heard that, right? He's showing you, maybe not, that he doesn't care about you, but that he is not going to prioritize you. I think that's super fair, particularly the stuff that Jagmeet was saying about workers and tying it to Mark Carney's history and what he's done. Before he's Prime Minister, before today. I think that checks. I think that tracks the way that Jagmeet talked about it. I think folks who are looking for certain words and certain words matter and actions that back that up. Because, of course, one of the problems with Justin Trudeau and the former government is sometimes they said the words and they didn't actually follow through on action, which is not better either, right?
Yep.
You need to be actually saying the important stuff and then following up. So I do think that there's some genuine criticism there. And I liked what I heard from Jagmeet today, talking about workers and talking about what is the plan. Because we keep talking about this thing. Obviously, we're focusing on Trump, but eventually people will start feeling the hurt. So what are you doing to help workers, help working families? I thought that was a smart place to go today.
So we kind of saw, and this is my amateur analysis of it, having watched way too much television today and done too much television today. Mark Carney we are Canada's new government, right? Just as a framing, I'm not saying that's what it is. We're going to be faster, more focused, more action-oriented, sort of responding to the criticism that you just spelled out, Mel, of the Trudeau government. Focus on workers and families, growth, more money in your pockets. We saw Pierre Poilievre saying it's more of the same. Don't be fooled, it's a cosmetic change. And then Jagmeet Singh seeing this as a shift to the middle, or to the right, as he said, though it's probably more middle on the Canadian spectrum, and that opening up space there for the NDP as a progressive option. That seems to be where things have settled at this point today. I mean, Greg, is that the choice you think voters are going to be presented with when Mark Carney goes back to Rideau Hall very soon, we think, and gets this whole election officially started?
Yeah, as a party in the middle, the Liberals, the middle moves, it shifts. When you look at the government of Jean Chrétien and who he was facing, again, the Bloc Québécois, but primarily at that time, Preston Manning was a very, very effective, loud voice for balanced budgets. And, we were coming, to be fair to the Mulroney government and Finance Minister Michael Wilson, they did start things, but it was the government of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin that balanced the budget. And then, in 2015, Justin Trudeau, upends that, totally, outfoxes Mulcair and says, we're going to run a deficit, and still wins. And
I promise he did not break.
Well aware, David. So,
over-delivered, you might say.
But, and again, it's really hard to have data to measure what people think the middle is. But there is a definite feeling that I feel of, people that I worked with in government and the, clients that I work with, in that, after the pandemic, inflation, that we had gone a lot in pretty far in that direction. It was time to swing back, and I think a lot of what Mark Carney has said reflects that. And I think that is currently where we are. Yeah. If the NDP can make a point on that and win from it, perhaps. But I think he's reflecting what Canadians want right now.
Well, this is what I wonder, Fred, I don't know if left-right even kind of applies anymore. It's almost like a circle where eventually they all bang into each other. But the Liberals throughout their history have always sort of moved to where the consensus is and done a good job of kind of hitting that historically in elections. Trudeau moved them in a more progressive direction. Carney's trying to move it in a different direction. Where do you think the consensus is right now? Because if the carbon tax is gone and Trump is there, where is the sweet spot in the electorate right now going into this?
Way too volatile to say. There is no left or right. It's all over the map. You remember the last election, the People's Party, when they went up to 5%, a lot of that vote was coming from the Green Party. It was a whole different shift. So it wasn't right versus left. And it's just volatile now. But back to the point you're making about the messaging of the main parties. If the Liberal message is about how they are nimble and they're a harder working, focused team, and if the Conservative message is that this is just like Justin Trudeau's team, I don't think that works for my Conservative friends. They need to, that is a part of their narrative. It needs to be a part of it. They need to hammer on that, but they got to show how they can take on Trump in some way. They've got to focus on that. And that is going to be the ballot question right now. Who can do that? And it kind of works for the Liberals in terms of if their message is that we have this team that can do this. The Conservatives need to get there somehow.
How? So, like, this is my question, because, like, even today when Pierre Poilievre was answered questions, he stuck very much with lines we have heard before. And message discipline, I get it. But, you were talking about industrial carbon pricing. We still don't know if the I think when the consumer tax was still going to be there, the Conservatives may have had an industrial policy. Now that that's gone, I don't know if they're going to have an industrial policy. And when I ask them, they don't answer the question. They say wait for the campaign. So what do they need to do? What is the move they can make?
They started it with the Canada First thing when he had the rally and he had the messaging on that. He doesn't seem to be focusing as hard on that message.
It's not on their social media. It's not being reinforced.
So what is
right?
it? Then what is the narrative? What are they pushing? How are they showing us that they can do this? They have to figure that out, and they have to figure it out very soon. So when we go to the polls, it's a clear message. They are disciplined when they have it, and I think they will pull it together and they'll get it. But
it feels like a big focus group right now. There's a tweet with about 8 memes of different slogans. And it's that spaghetti against the wall, what's sticking? And I'm not sure using the public, using the electorate as your focus group is the best idea. I get that it's volatile, but I sat across from you for a long time where you drive home the point of having a successful narrative. I totally agree. I don't know what their narrative is anymore.
Well, I mean, the things came up, like the slogans we've seen: axe attacks, common sense, stop the crime, spike the hike, bring it home, and Canada first, right? They're moving through all these sort of different things. But Mel, talk about where the New Democrats fit into this. You liked what you heard today from Jagmeet Singh, but if the election polarizes, they're in a tough spot. So, what's the opportunity here for them with this change?
I kind of split it in two things. I think if the ballot box question at the end of the day is who do you trust to go up and have those conversations with Trump, that's one thing. If the ballot box question is who do you trust to have your back when Trump does whatever he's going to do, I think that's a place where the NDP can play and a place where the NDP can take up space, particularly when we're hearing Mark Carney say we're going to spend less, we're going to restrain spending in a time where we may have to invest in people. We may have to invest in helping people if they're getting, if they're feeling the impact, if they're losing their jobs, if they're dealing with a higher cost of living. And if Jagmeet is the only person who's talking about affordability from that lens, I think that's a good place for them to take up that space, because you kind of have the Conservatives and the Liberals who are going to say similar things, which kind of leaves the NDP to take up the other side of the conversation.
Yeah, the phrase is spend less to invest more. I think, I mean, as I understand it, and I would love to have Mr. Carney come in for a conversation about this, is that, less just sort of deficit spending on core government just operations, and if you do deficits, it's investing in economic infrastructure and things that have an economic return. That's kind of how I get it.
But again, getting rid of the capital gains tax, getting rid of stuff like that, which is bringing in revenue, so that a bit complicated for them to say those things,
the
right?
financials are going to need to be sorted out. I think that is fair to say. So, Greg, on that, there are directional statements from the new Prime Minister. We obviously, Dominic LeBlanc never did a full economic statement. He won't get to do a budget. We're going to have an election without that, it seems. When he says he want to be faster, focused, and action-oriented, okay, carbon tax is gone. F-35 is being looked at, but there's going to be a rate drop in a week. So how do you show that? How do you put action behind those words in the time you have before an election?
Well, the next couple of days, the way I'll be interested to see how they follow up on the announcement. It was expected. How do you make sure that people are aware that you've been chasing the car, you caught the car, now what do you do with it? Well, it's done. I would expect there's going to be there'll be a little echo story of people upset that they're losing their rebates. In terms of I don't want to swear, but FAFO,
reaping and sowing is a family-friendly way.
So
you
people,
reap what you sow.
were you aware of the rebate and what it was doing? That's not necessarily a bad story because it shows what this program was about. But we're also forgetting that the program existed, and Fred, the campaign you ran, there was a carbon tax as well. There was a time when Canadians wanted to see what their politicians were going to do to address climate change. Right now, we have this massive crisis thanks to the President of the United States, but at another point we will want, and there may be parts of the electorate that even still want to know what your climate plan is. So I'll be interested to see what happens in the next couple of days. To your point, he has a very short window to show that he is doing those things that he said before the election's called. I think your platform is going to be part of that too.
So, Fred, I wonder about this. The criticism from the Conservatives that, it's the same old thing. They've just changed the leader. Most of the Conservative caucus was elected under Aaron O'Toole. It's very different under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre, right? So that is a proof point that a change in leader can change the entire makeup and focus of a party. I mean, how vulnerable do you think the Liberals are to having Mark Carney lashed to the mast of the SS Trudeau?
Well, I think that's their most vulnerable spot, is that they weren't just a part of the caucus, they were part of the government for the last 9 years that were making the decisions that the Conservatives can hammer on, that caused the uptick in crime, that caused the housing crisis, that caused inflation. The same players are all around the table. They're all still there. So I think it's a vulnerability for the Liberals if the Conservatives can message that properly and make sure it sticks. Carney not doing himself any favors by having Chrystia Freeland and others like that at the table as well. I think he had an opportunity today to distance himself a bit, and he chose not to. So that's one of the things he'll have to deal with.
There's a lot being made, Mel, by the fact that Jerry Butts was advising Mark Carney in the leadership campaign, and he was there today. Tom Pitfield, people like that were part of the Trudeau, years and the political machine. Even though Butts has left government famously after the SNC-Lavalin problems. Does that land with voters, or is that an inside baseball thing? I don't know.
I'm of two minds. And one, I think we have learned the lesson, or at least I should say, the progressive parties have learned the lesson that if you do not define your opponent, they will get to completely redefine themselves. Pierre Poilievre has a track record as a minister, and he's completely been able to almost rebrand himself from the decisions he was making at the cabinet table. If Carney does there is a role for the opposition to try to frame Carney the way that they want to frame Carney. So I think that that's legitimate. And for the Conservatives, they'll want to show how similar he is to Justin Trudeau. For New Democrats, I think you want to show how different he is from Justin Trudeau. So they're both going to be doing different things and framing him up. And I think you said this earlier, Fred, but all the same folks. It sounds a little, I'm trying to find a nicer way to say it, but a little bit like loser talk. Like that worked 2 months ago. It no longer works. So you need to figure out a new way to talk about it. There are still, I think, some salient points for them to make as part of that conversation. And again, it's important for them to frame who Carney is so that Carney doesn't get to frame himself. But it's 87%. I'm around this table with you folks, and it doesn't work with me. So I can't imagine that it works with regular folks who are really worried about Donald Trump. So I think there are some things that could work and are important when you're framing up who Prime Minister Carney will be. But I don't think they've nailed it. I don't think that works.
I like this. Canadians have a capacity right now for so much information. Do they want to hear what the Conservative leader thinks of Mark Carney, or do they want to hear what their Prime Minister is going to do about Donald Trump? And it's, how much space is there for both of those to exist? We know that right now, Canadians are really engaged with this story. So it's a tough case for the Conservatives to try to explain who they think Mark Carney is. There's not a lot of space for it.
Yeah, I think what maybe is more persuasive is it's still important to frame the choices. It's still important to say, Mark Carney will do this, Mark Carney will not do this. But the backwards looking, I don't find the most persuasive argument right now.
Right. So the NDP are going to say he's very different than Justin Trudeau. The Conservatives are going to say he's just like Justin Trudeau. So he's like Schrodinger's Carney. He's somewhere in the middle of this thing, right? I wonder. Pierre Poilievre was asked a couple of questions today, and Mel, maybe I'll start with you on this one. He was one of his leadership positions, if you remember, was he was going to fire Tiff Macklem. He was going to fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. He was asked that again today, if that was still his position, and he didn't quite answer it, but he said if public officials are underperforming, they should lose their jobs. Mark Carney should have lost his job for what he did as the governor of the Bank of England, even though he was handed Brexit. I thought that was an interesting kind of non-answer at a time when the bank is trying to respond to tariffs and these things, throwing out this kind of potential instability there in one of your core institutions. What did you make of that?
And the interest rates have very much come down since he was starting to say those things.
And still need some calibration depending on what Trump does,
Totally. So that's interesting. But I think that this is the problem. that the Conservatives are currently faced with. They've put all of their baskets in the Canada's Broken Nothing Works basket. They've put all their baskets.
All their eggs. I gotcha. Which are very expensive in the U.S.
Which, exactly. Yeah. Where, you know, I think the reason why we're not seeing them do too much Canada First is not because that's not what people are looking for right now, but it's because I don't think people, like, I think it's a disjointed thought for people because they've convinced people for so long that things aren't working here, almost using similar talking points to Donald Trump, that folks can't say, oh, well, you were just saying this to me the other day. How can you now say this to me? And I think it's a little bit similar on Tiff Macklem, right? Folks are in a different place, but when you've put all of your time and energy trying to sell one thing, and folks are no longer angry. Folks are now scared. The shift there, and I think we're seeing it in real time, the positioning of the Conservatives or the shifting from their position is hard because they threw everything at it.
So Fred, I wonder about that, right? Because it's a question of flexibility, pivoting, moving, you know, and when the promise to fire was made, even though it was really Stephen Polaz's policies he was mad about, not Tiff Macklem's, there was a mood for disruption and anger, burn it all down in the country because people were mad. I'm not sure that's the mood right now. So what do you make of the sticking with that kind of, even though I think people are looking for a bit of stability on the economic front in Canada?
It's not the mood anymore. It was the mood for the last number of years, and that's why he was incredibly successful in the leadership race, incredibly successful in the polls. Like, he had record-breaking polls. If there was election last fall, the Conservatives would have won the largest majority in Canadian history. But the electorate has changed drastically under Trump, his election and what he's doing. People, obviously, affordability is still an issue, housing, crime, but that's not top of mind right now when you have Trump breathing down our neck and doing whatever it is he's going to do to us. So it has shifted, and he's going to have to adapt to that somehow. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how he does it, but they've got to figure it out soon.
Look, here on the 14th day of March, we don't know, we think the election's April 28th, May 5th, something like that. The polls have just moved dramatically. And look, ECOS has another poll out, which is another outlier. It's got the Liberals at, like, it begins with a 5. But everyone else is kind of like, it's a neck and neck margin of error battle in the 30s, right? 30 percentage points. Greg, is a majority on the table for anybody right now with this kind of thing? It seems like the inevitable Conservative majority is now, it's Liberal minority, Conservative minority. Seems like the most likely outcomes at this moment in time. What's your sense of it?
I'm trying to remember offhand. I think it's 5 minority governments, parliaments that we've had since 2000.
Yeah, two majorities, 11 and 15, right?
Yeah. So I'm not sure that we have this default that a majority is absolute success, but maybe Canadians are telling us that's not how they want their parliament to be run. So I've seen all kinds of polling, you know, that have, you know, and I'm never a big fan of seat projections because I think they can be very, very wonky. But there was no need for the Conservative leader to make that promise that he would fire the governor of the Bank of Canada at the time he did it. Parliamentarians who've been around for a long time know that you don't do things in anger because you're going to have to live with them, or you're going to be in opposition while you watch a government do the things that you know are really bad, like firing people like that. He did and said things that are going to be an albatross around his neck that he did not have to do when he was 20 points ahead. And this is where the reckoning will come in. A carpenter, it takes a carpenter to build a barn, but any idiot can burn one down. And it's really easy to say, burn it all down. But at some point, this comes home.
Right. Look, and we'll see if there's a reckoning or not, right? Because, you know, what goes up, what comes down, what goes down can come up. Mel, I just wonder, you know, looking at it right now, though, I mean, do you think, because we're going to have an election, you know? I mean, does it feel like a minority situation? Does a majority seem, it seems difficult with the math. I don't know how you view it. What would it take to break in a particular way, or a majority still possible?
Yeah, I think based on the polls that we're seeing, it's definitely going to be a minority. Which way it switches, it's hard to say. Obviously, if the polls stay the way that they are, I think that's probably what we're looking at, particularly when you look at national polls. And I think that's the tricky thing about looking at national polls is it's hard based on where the support is in the different provinces.
Very
and
true.
And it doesn't necessarily always give, it may give the popular vote, it doesn't give the riding by riding breakdown. And I think that's the thing to kind of pay attention to see what side, or, you know, the NDP does a surprise thing and they pull it off and they're the minority government. But yeah, it's I think a question mark for right now.
Look, in 2025, anything is possible. You know, I'm not ruling out a bloc majority at this stage. But, you know, Fred, look,
the math, yeah.
I'm very bad at math. But, you know, Fred, you've run national campaigns. You've looked, you know, you look at the big picture opinion polls. Vote efficiency tends to favor the Liberals because of the running up the score in the prairies for the Conservatives. I mean, what do you see when you look at this? Because the NDP going down, I mean, that could elect a bunch of Conservatives in BC and southwestern Ontario, but a bunch of, Liberals might be saved in the GTA and whatever. I mean, how do you look at it, what a parliament would look like with an election held in the circumstances right now?
The default assumption in every election should be a minority government. We have three strong national parties that run candidates in every riding, and a strong party in the bloc that can win a lot of seats, and then the Green can also at least eat some vote from different parties. So that's the assumption. This election, though, is framing up to be a pivotal one where it could be Poilievre versus Carney, and the smaller parties could suffer from that. But to your point, where does those seats go to? So if the NDP, they're collapsing in a lot of ways. Now, it could be like Ontario, where they held a lot of them regardless, but there is the possibility, though, that even though that vote collapses to the Liberals, that could actually help the Conservatives win those seats. While also in Quebec, and I've seen this in the last campaign, there's this threshold where we were growing, and if we grew another 3 or 4 points in the last election in Quebec, we wouldn't have won any more seats, but we would have cost the bloc a ton of seats.
Liberals might have had a majority.
They could have had a majority. So it's this weird play that happens with this type of system we have.
I was just going to say, and also the interesting part, particularly for orange-red voters and the strategic vote, because if you're looking, west of Ontario, it's actually not the Liberals who are next if you want to beat a Conservative, right? It is actually Team Orange. So that's why the strategic voting argument may work in, downtown Toronto, but it doesn't work that way at all across the country.
No, I hear you. So look, Fred, I want to ask you one last question, just we're out of time, just about Quebec. Because, that dynamic you talked about there, some of my colleagues and my ragtime colleagues, speaking to people in the Bloc Québécois, and sort of like the consensus view I have, as it was explained to me, is that the number one choice of Quebec voters right now, at this moment in time, would be a Liberal minority with the Bloc having a significant position in the balance of power. But if it looks like the Conservatives might end up winning, they might stampede to a Liberal majority being the preferred preference of Quebec voters. How do you see that? Do you agree with that dynamic based on the work you've done in the last campaign? How do you see that maybe playing out with Trump and nationalism, all these things becoming a big thing?
It'll be interesting. So that assumption means a lot of Bloc voters would flood to the Liberals.
Around Montreal, maybe you see some of that? I don't know.
Look, it's hard to tell. It's hard to see how something like this could play out. Poilievre, I assumed going in, if the election was months ago, could have done very, very well in Quebec, and I wouldn't write him off there yet. His French is good. His message is pretty good there. There's still opportunity for him to actually grow there himself. But again, does that help the Liberals if he goes there?
Yeah, it's things like Le Salamar Verdun may very well flip back. You know what I mean? These sorts of things and, stuff. Greg, quick last 20 seconds and we got to say goodbye. What do you want to say?
I was told there would be no math.
Okay, yeah. No, that's true. That is my promise every week because I can't do it either. 87%. That's the one number we can't remember.